Joining us on the second edition of the Off the Air podcast, Scoreboard, digital host and reporter for the Yankees. You also see him on Yes, you hear him on Sirius XM, CBS Sports Radio. Fordham, class of 2009, WFUV Sports alum Justin Shackil. Justin, thanks so much for joining us.
What's going on, guys? How's everyone doing?
Pretty good. That's where we're going to start. How's this quarantine treating you? How's the sportsless landscape treating you?
No, I've not been aching for as much sports as I thought I would be. When you go back to March and you think about what everyone was saying, what the prognosis was going to be, the outlook, and they were saying you might not see live sports for a while. And at the time, I said, "Oh, that obviously is not good for my livelihood, but just for my my own mental capacity, so to speak. I'm like, what am I going to do without having something really to watch? Because I don't watch too much TV. There's no program that I'm really absorbing myself into on a daily basis. I pretty much watch live sports programming and the news, and that's pretty much it. So when they said that there weren't going to be too much live sporting action going on for a few months, I thought, well, that's not good. But been keeping myself busy with the same activities I'm sure a lot of people have, exercising and finding new hobbies, reading. Nothing new here, but it's definitely been keeping me busy.
Justin, when we talked to Dan Duva last week, he was talking about going back and listening to some of his stuff because obviously he had a lot of time on his hands. Have you been, doing some of that, trying to figure out kind of ways to improve, if you will?
Yeah. So within the last year, actually it was a year this past May, I called my first boxing telecast, and it's something that I've been wanting to do for a while. I box as a fitness hobby. I've been doing that for years, and for a while I was saying to myself, man, I would love to combine that passion with the industry I work in. And it was top of mind for a while, then it kind of took a back seat, and last April or so it kind of just fell into my lap, an opportunity, and I ran with it, and I'm having a lot of fun doing that. And that really allowed me to, this time has really allowed me the chance to really comb over all my boxing work with a fine-tooth comb. And, I've been able to update my boxing reel. It's something that not a lot of sportscasters have. So I'm really pleased with that and the way it turned out. And there's been things that I've gone back, making mental notes, taking physical notes as well. And then boxing has kind of just returned in the last week or so. Top Rank Boxing on ESPN has been putting up live telecasts, so live boxing is back. I'm very excited about that, and I've been watching that a lot. And now's the time where I'm kind of observing. It's something that I always done, but there's only so many replays that you can watch between whoever, Gotti, Ward, the trilogy there, or, Ali Frazier. You've seen a bunch of on ESPN classics throughout this pandemic. So it was nice to finally see some, live action boxing. And, I think Joe Tessitore on ESPN does a terrific job of blow by blow. So it's fun to finally have more live boxing to watch, and you're able to take those notes as you watch those broadcasts.
Justin, rewinding, you came through the program. Everyone who comes to FUV has their own story. They either wanted to go into the field and knew it, or didn't necessarily know of it and stumbled upon it. Were you one of those people who knew this is exactly what you wanted to do? And if so, how did you learn about WFUV in particular?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to do something within the industry. I knew about Fordham's reputation, and I only really had heard about WFUV. It wasn't until I went to Fordham right before it was in January of 2006. I had spent the first semester of college local, and then I transferred in after that first semester of freshman year. And I had to go onto the campus, I think, to physically hand in some type of transcript. I couldn't remember. I was with my mother, and I said, well, while we're here, let's see if we could look at WFUV. So it was my mother and myself, and that was the first time I met Bob Aarons, former executive producer, and he kind of took me on a guided tour. And right then and there is where I kind of got a idea of what exactly went on at WFUV, and I was hooked. I was, ready to roll. The semester, I don't think, started for another 2 weeks or so. And I was ready to get to campus and get going because, he really excited me by showing me exactly what they do there. And that's when I first had an idea of what WFUV was all about. And of course, only grew from there after being surrounded by the other kids, attending the workshops, and then ultimately doing the demos and getting on the air.
You talked about Bob, and obviously a lot of the people who we're going to have on this podcast at some point, were mentored by Bob Aarons, and he had a lot to do with their career. What were your first impressions of him? I know you touched on it just a little bit, but when you first meet him, what do you immediately think, and how much of a privilege was it to get to work for him for, I guess, 3.5 years in your case?
Yeah, the very first meeting that I was talking about with Bob and my mother and myself, his passion just, was the biggest thing that stood out to me. And you could tell this was a guy who knew what he was doing. At that point, you knew he led the sports staff, and being there on that January day and having him guide us around and outlining everything that went on, I felt like, okay, I'm going to be in good hands here. And this is exactly what I am coming here to do. It's right here, and it's with this guy. So his first impression was everything to me. And then, you get to campus, the semester starts, and that relationship just grows, whether, it's him, sitting down one-on-one in his office, just shooting the breeze, or it's him listening to mock broadcasts that you did, and then eventually listening to game replays and trying to figure out how you can get better there, constantly offering constructive criticism, constantly putting you in touch with some of the alumni that may have been in your shoes at one point in a certain situation, and you can kind of bounce off questions and ideas to them. So he was just the perfect sounding board, and the perfect lifeline. I think someone who wanted to get into this business and learn it at the collegiate level, there's nobody better, in my opinion, that anyone could have had than Bob Aarons. So he's, really been everything from mentor / grandfather figure / college buddy. It's a weird mix, and I know there's a lot of other people that kind of feel the same way. It's a guy that you probably have a tough time explaining what he's all about to your friends or family if they don't have an idea of what WFUV and what he's all about. So, but that's what also makes it cool, right? That this fraternity that we're all in. That's what makes it special, at least a part of it. Bob's certainly a big part of that.
Speaking of being in good hands in the fraternity, when you entered WFUV, a lot of it is upperclassmen showing you the ropes and leading the way. Who were some of those characters when you initially joined WFUV, and what did you learn from them?
Well, I think I was the biggest character because, it's funny that, during this pandemic, as you can see, I am in dire need of a haircut, even with the hat on. And when I entered Fordham, you can ask some of, the people I was in school with at the time. I don't know if you guys even know who Jeff Spicoli is, but I had the Spicoli cut, which is basically no haircut. My hair came down to my shoulders. I had the black and white Vans checkered slip-on sneakers, and I came in there and I could automatically tell it was a workshop, and I won't forget it because I think it was Gary Cohen who was doing this workshop. This was my first interaction with everybody, and Bob Aarons kind of said, "Hey, we have a new student." He told me to stand up and introduce myself, and mind you guys, think about a guy, you kind of know it because you've been through it. Think about there's just, I guess you could equate it to like a random walk-on coming into the program midway through the year. It's a little different. It's kind of unique. So I could tell everybody was kind of staring at me, and later on, they would say it to my face once they got to know me. Who the hell is this kid? Because I definitely looked different than your average Fordham student, and I felt like a bunch of kids did. I know my sports, I know what I'm doing here, and then right away, you could tell that there were other people in that room who were on the same level or well ahead of you. So kind of said to myself, hey, this is going to take some work, and this is a time where you're going to have to put in the work. And obviously it turned, you do that and you become better. But that was my introduction in that room. I was a freshman, so you had guys like Greg Jamborisi, longtime announcer for the Lakewood Blue Claws. He was probably the lead announcer for Fordham basketball and football at the time. You had Ryan Rucco in that room. He was a sophomore. You had Lou Baricelli, who's the head of PR at MLB Network. You had Dan Flanagan, who was a junior. And, my time at Fordham, as far as play-by-play goes, I was up until my senior year, really. It was tough. It was tough to get those lead play-by-play opportunities, because in front of me, I had Ryan, who was a sophomore. I had Dan, who eventually graduated with my year, but he was, older than Dan Duva. And then you had Dan Flanagan, who, I think Ryan would admit, maybe Dan too. I think Dan Flanagan at the time, being 21, 22, was probably the most polished play-by-play announcer out of all of us. And obviously that's saying something, because at the time, they were all great. You could see that guys like Ryan Rucco and Dan Duva were going to be, they were going to go on to have a nice career in this business. Obviously they have, but that's just how competitive it was. And it wasn't a bad competition. We were, it was very friendly, but it was tough to earn that chair if you wanted to do Fordham men's basketball, Fordham football on a consistent weekly basis. It wasn't easy. Obviously it makes you, makes you better in the long run, but it was tough to crack the air. And I'm really happy that it kind of was that way, because it forced me to be better. That was the carrot on the string. And I wanted to be where those men were at the time. And ultimately, you get there eventually, but they kept me motivated. So I think back on my time at Fordham, one of the things is how motivated I was to always get better. And I try to keep that feeling of ultimate motivation with me all the time in whatever I do.
Justin, it was funny you were talking about the growing pains and the amount of talented people you worked with just in your time at FUV. How long did it feel like it took you to kind of fit in at FUV and start hitting your stride? I know you said it was tough for you to break through until about senior year, but did you feel like you started, getting opportunities, whether it be to produce or do updates or things like that before that?
Yeah, I think, you talk about up until my senior year, like being like the, one of the primary play-by-play announcers. That took until my senior year, but throughout that second half of the freshman year, my sophomore, my junior year, I was ingratiated in WFUV. I spent more time at the station there, than I did in my dorm or my off-campus apartment eventually. And the other kids who were doing the same, they noticed, the staff is usually about 30 students or so, at least when I was there. I'm not sure what it is today, but it was around 30 students. And then you kind of know what the tier is, right? You have some students who are there for, it's another activity that they can do while in college. Then you have the students who kind of have 1 foot in, but never really 2 feet in. And then you have students who are really serious about this. They're always at the station and they want to do this once they get out. I was definitely part of that tier, and the other people who were in that group, they recognize that as well. And, those turn out to be my friends from college. When I think back at college, like that's my group, and a lot of them are still friends to this day. Some of them aren't even in the industry, but the people who made it a point to be at the station all the time, like myself, I gravitated to them rather quickly, maybe my freshman year, at the end of the freshman year, definitely by the midway point of my sophomore year. So that didn't take long, but once you identify what kind of tier that you fall under, I think the other people in that tier, you gravitate toward one another.
You talked about getting reps, and one thing that sets FUV apart is the ability to be in professional clubhouses and beat report at professional games. How much did that benefit you specifically, being able to be around some of the people you grew up admiring in the field?
Yeah, well, first of all, it was really cool because we were actually getting paid to do it. And I think that's one of the hidden secrets about WFUV to the people who are on the Fordham campus, and they realize what you do, but you don't have they don't know that you get paid for it. They don't know that you get paid to go to, at the time, Shea Stadium or the Meadowlands and the Garden at a Yankee Stadium. That's what was kind of cool about it. And it was amazing. I mean, Chris Carino, who I consider a mentor, he comes into FUV to do workshops. So an FUV alum. This is just an example with him. And then I grew up 15, 20 minutes from the Meadowlands. I was a big New Jersey Net fan growing up, and I jumped at the opportunity. I think I was the only one to cover the Nets from going to the Bronx to the Meadowlands, trying to find my way and do that beat steadily. And I loved it. I tried to do as many games as possible. And when you're at the Meadowlands, you're at the net games, obviously I'm going to, try and absorb as much information from Chris Carino when he's there doing the games on the radio for the Nets, and Ian Eagle as well. Ian was somebody who I knew before college. I went to his broadcasting camp when I was in high school. That was kind of my first crash course into what this industry is all about. And that was another way for me to kind of cultivate that relationship with Ian, being at the Meadowlands, covering the team, and just, either asking him questions that I may have, doing it face to face, or keeping him updated about what I'm doing while I'm back at school. So that's definitely one example. You guys know I love baseball. I was the Mets beat reporter, I think my junior year, and be at Shea Stadium the entire summer. And the same thing. I would ask people like Gary Cohen, who's kind enough to, come and do workshops with us on a pretty routine basis. One of, the announcers that you would see 2-3 times a year coming to Fordham and talking to us as a group, which was really cool. And, I would, be able to talk to him. Also, Shea Stadium was the place where I kind of cut my first real baseball demo, so to speak. There were nights where I would sneak into an empty booth and ask, and if anyone was around, I'd ask them if I can use it. If not, I know that my first baseball demo came from the upper deck at Shea Stadium while I was a beat reporter there. I, left my work spot in the press box and I went upstairs so I wouldn't bother anyone. And I called an inning. This was, I think, 2006 or 2007. And I called an inning, or, Orlando Hernandez was pitching for the Mets at that point. I believe they were playing the Nationals. I know I have it. I'd have to go look for it. But that piece of tape, that inning, got me my first baseball play-by-play job the following summer, in the summer of '08. So, going to Shea Stadium, going to the Meadowlands, doing those beat reporting jobs, that was so invaluable for me at the time, not just because I was learning how to, be a reporter and how to conduct myself at the professional level, but it afforded me the opportunity to cut some major league tape. And that was pretty cool in of itself.
You were talking about that first job right after college. You got to do some minor league baseball. You worked for a couple teams, Trenton Thunder, Tennessee Smokies, Mobile Bay Bears. How was that experience over the course of just a couple of years, getting to do minor league baseball, kind of bouncing around the country?
It was a lot of fun at the time. I was having fun. It was also tough. There were some obstacles, right? Like anything. But I look back on it now and I say to myself, man, those were the best summers that I've had, arguably of my life. I mean, calling ball every day, number one. Number two, you are with a baseball team, whether it is you're riding buses with them, you're, chatting with them, you're eating with them on the road, you're with a ball team for 5-6 months. You are part of the team, so to speak. There's only about, at the time, now they have a lot more coaches, but at the time you have the manager, you might have the pitching coach, hitting coach, another coach, trainer, strength and conditioning guy, the radio guy, and then the team. So you're part of it, which was really cool to me. And they that allowed me to be on the air every single night for 3 hours, and there's no substitute for that. So I look back on it as far as my work goes, and I don't think there could be any substitution for me getting better at a young age than there was in calling minor league ball at that time. And then when you think back at some of the other things that you have to do, pulling tarp when it's raining, and maybe making sales calls, and just different things in Mobile. We didn't have an elevator, and we had a really steep press box area at the very top of the stadium, and I'd have to lug my equipment all the way up in the just awful weather situations in Mobile, Alabama. You're right on the Gulf. When it rained, it poured every single day. And I think back and I'm like, man, at the time there were some moments when I'm saying to myself, what am I doing with my life? But then you look back on it and you said, man, it was all for a reason, and they were really good times. And you also meet a bunch of people. That's baseball at its core right there, because to me, baseball is a lot about relationships. And you go and do minor league ball, and you meet someone, and then you may not see them for 4 or 5 years. And then where I'm at now with the Yankees, maybe they come in as a visiting player or a visiting coach, or now there are some Yankee staffers that were in Trenton with me back in 2010, and you have those relationships and you hit it off like no time has passed. And I think that's so cool, and it's one of the parts of baseball that really connects with me, and it's a big reason why I think it is my passion. So those first few years right out of school, obviously it was tough. You're trying to build that foundation, but as you're building it, as you're making that climb, definitely got to take the time to step back, take a breath, and say, man, this, where you are at in the moment right now, it definitely beats a desk job. And you may not see it, but this is paving the way for what you ultimately want to do. So, try and enjoy in the moment.
You talk about some of the better moments. Last week when we were talking to Dan Duva, he cited a trip to St. Louis doing a basketball game as one of his fonder trips during his FUV career. Are there any road trips in particular that stick out to you and resonate as the best moments in college?
There are. I would have to say this, though. I have to preface with everything I say about Fordham athletics with the simple fact that, guys, when I was there, I did not call a single Fordham victory between Fordham football, Fordham men's hoops, and Fordham women's basketball. When I was doing Fordham women's basketball as a junior, it was myself and Brian Clark, who was a sophomore, and we were pretty much the women's basketball team. Every game we would switch between play-by-play and color. And that Fordham team 07-08 went 0-29. So we literally didn't call a win that season. The football team, I can't remember the record exactly, but I know my senior year, they had, I think, 1 win, maybe 2, but I wasn't on the call. And then the men's basketball team, I believe, had 3 wins my senior season. I didn't call any of them. So I didn't have any wins there. But those road trips were a lot of fun because you're, like I said, you're, especially during those times when there's not a lot of winning going on, you're also learning together how to cover a losing team. That's kind of hard. And to have that education at the college level, I think really benefits you in the long run, because I haven't been on teams that have to be blunt, they haven't been that poor, since those teams that I was in college. And that's a good thing. Obviously, it's tough to cover a losing team, but if you do it right out of the gate, you're kind of getting a crash course on how to do it. And yeah, like I said, it benefits you from the long run. So kind of being on the road with, my peers in that sense, learning how to fight through adversity on the air, but also, I think back, there was a lot of trips to Philadelphia between LaSalle and St. Joe's and Temple. And I don't know if this happens so much anymore, but there were a couple of times when we were in college when the men's and women's teams would play on the same day, whether it be at home or away. In this case, I believe they were playing at Temple, and it was a doubleheader. It was the women's team playing the Temple women's team, and then maybe an hour later, it was the men's team in action. And they sent 2 split crews. So we had a women's crew and a men's crew. And we went out to eat at a pretty expensive restaurant the night before. We were with Joe Berbari, he's a great sports information director. And there was 2 crews there. We sat at a big round table, and we just laughed the whole night. So we had a great meal. We were all just so soaked into what was going on with the basketball programs, because we felt that big responsibility to bring that action to the Fordham fans. And we were on the road, we were doing it right. It was great. And that's a moment that I look back on fondly. And just having those times together, whether it be on the road or whether it be in one person's apartment, studying up, prepping for the game the next night or so. And those are my best memories. It wasn't about going out on the weekend and having fun that way. I don't remember too many of those nights. I remember the nights where we were together on a Friday or a Saturday, and we were prepping for whether it be a show or a game the next day. That was the best time for me.
You brought up an interesting point there, which is, covering teams that don't necessarily win a ton. We're kind of spoiled now. I did some women's games last year, and they won 20-odd games. Obviously, unfortunately for you, that didn't quite happen when you were there. What would your advice be to cover a losing team, to call games for a losing team? Because it's obviously a really difficult task.
Yeah, I think my biggest rule of thumb is approaching, poor play, right? How do you kind of do your job in a responsible way with that? I think one of the biggest things that, was kind of taught to me, and then later, and it wasn't until after I graduated college, it was kind of put into words perfectly. It's, don't critique the performance, not the player. You could say, John Doe isn't having the best of nights, or, he's struggling mightily from 3-point range. But that's just an indictment of how his performance that given day is going. There's no reason for you to be saying, John Doe really stinks from 3-point range, or, he's had a terrible season. You can get your point across the same way. The audience gets the message. So I think it's really important to, again, critique the performance, not the player. And then just kind of take one game at a time. And what I mean by that, and I know I've mentioned this to students before, this is something that's kind of really one of my big elements when I do play-by-play, is you need to outline what's important on that specific day. And I think this is important for those losing teams. I think it's important every time, but I think it's important for those losing teams and those losing situations. You need to let the audience know why that game matters and what's important that day. So whether it's Fordham's trying to snap that 8-game losing skid to start the season, Fordham's desperately trying to get that first win of the season, whatever that may be, I think it's important to kind of make that storyline stand out, and then kind of fall into the job you're doing as a play-by-play announcer, given that description and kind of painting the word picture. If you keep that narrative going, it kind of just makes everything else stand on its own. And like I said, I think that's important for whatever type of team you're covering. But when it's a losing team and it's a hard time, it's a tough season, I think it's really important to do that. But again, you have to keep it in perspective, because these obviously aren't, they're not all bad players, so to speak. It's just, something that happens. There's a reason why they're, scholarship D1 athletes. They're good players, right? But, maybe it's not the right fit. Maybe all the pieces aren't fitting together. Coaching may be an issue. So I think it's important to always keep that in your mind, critique the performance, not the player.
Justin, before we let you go, what makes FUV stand out in your mind, and how can it continue to stand out moving forward?
I think for me, when I think of what people at FUV have done, and then when I hear other people talk about their collegiate experience, I don't sense that it was as tight-knit of a program that WFUV runs. And I think the fact that it's been so consistent, that tight-knit feeling has been there throughout time, I think that's a testament to a lot of things. I think it's the leadership, whether, it's, in my case, Bob Aarons is there, Bobby's there now. You're able to push that message across. I think it's the alumni who were in those situations and in that atmosphere, and have been able to push that message across to the students who are there now. And it's just carried over time after time, whether, through each cycle of students, that has stood the test of time. And it's important because, a lot of times, your peers in the program, your peers at FUV, you go out and their success is terrific. It also means good things for you, because it's putting WFUV in a great light. It's putting Fordham in a great light. And again, it's all who you know. I mean, you've heard that time and time again, really in any industry in life, but especially this one, it's all who you know. They can make that recommendation for you if they're in that situation, if they're in that position. And I just think that's how the story's told, So when you're here, when I was there, I talked about the guys in front of me. I didn't look at it in a negative light, because one, I was told from an early stage of my time at FUV that was a good thing. And I understood why it was a good thing right away as well. And those same kids that, I was competing with, so to speak, they're my, lifelong friends. And because I was working with them while I was there. I don't think too many college programs, you work with people, but ultimately, you have to, you have to look out for yourself, so to speak. I think at FUV it might be a little different. Obviously, I'm speaking without having been in another program, but just from hearing other people's college stories, I think the tight-knit nature of WFUV is really what makes it stand out.
That's Justin Shackil. We appreciate you coming on, sharing all that insight, and we hope everything continues to stay well and healthy with you, and we appreciate you coming on.
Thanks,
Thank
Justin.
you, guys. Thank you for having me. I hope everyone's safe and everyone's family is safe as well.